Hi guys, Ben here from Airline2Sim, and welcome with a bit of a heavy heart from me, I guess, to Beirut in Lebanon. Now, the whole reason I wanted to do a little video was actually just to talk to you a bit about this, because you'll know if you follow me, and maybe if you follow my Instagram, stuff like that, you'll know that I used to live here. My day job, away from playing around with aeroplanes on a computer, is I'm a radio broadcaster, and I've been on radio stations all over the world, including very recently. I spent almost 3 years on an English radio station, Virgin Radio, here in Beirut in Lebanon. So obviously I was super upset about what happened, and when I heard news of that big explosion, my heart was broken, really. And lots of my friends are affected. Just to kind of bring it home, here's a picture of my old apartment, and you can see completely destroyed. All the windows are smashed in. This is my whole bedroom, and you see there's glass everywhere, and the windows are blown in, lying on the bed. Had I been there at the time, then maybe I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now. It's a bit scary, really, and a bit close to home. In fact, my apartment, this is the ex-plane Beirut scenery. This is the hospital, which was completely destroyed. If you remember, probably saw the pictures of this hospital, the Saint George Hospital, was totally devastated by the blast. And my apartment is just behind it. One of these that have not actually modelled my apartment in the scenery, but it's very close. My old apartment building is modelled, which is I think this one over there. That's where I first lived when I moved there, and then I moved a bit closer into the city, and you can just see just how close it is. The warehouse, I think it was this one, was the one where they stored all the ammonium nitrate, stupidly, and it blew up. And you see this grain silo here. You can actually see there's a little ship here, and this is where the grain, a little conveyor belt, I guess, inside there into the grain silo. This actually took a lot of the hit. Otherwise, the whole rest of the city would have been even more badly affected. And as you can see, super close to a residential area. All these areas here full of little bars and restaurants, really kind of busy nightlife scene in Lebanon. It's a big kind of party town, and then you get all the big hotels as well. The very famous Phoenicia Hotel, which is modelled there. In fact, that's the room that I stayed when I very first went to Lebanon. Right there, you can just see my balcony. And then over here is the Four Seasons Hotel. All of these hotels hit by the blast, glass everywhere, interiors trash, people hurt, and of course this pales into insignificance with hundreds of people dead, thousands of people injured, and hundreds of thousands of people left without a home. An absolute tragedy for Lebanon. And again, just a little thing I showed you. You can see in the sim where I stayed when I first went to Lebanon. And on my final night in Beirut, I had dinner in my favorite French restaurant, like a little French bistro called Coquelet. And this is what it looked like. And here's actually a picture of my steak frites from my Instagram. And then this is what it looks like now. So yeah, I think it kind of brings it home, right? And I'm going to put some links in the description below if you want to help out and donate and help out those people who've lost everything in this blast. Then you can do that. But super scary stuff, and a lot of questions to answer as to quite why they ended up storing 3,000 tons of high explosive next to a big city. But there we are. This scenery, by the way, an amazing rendition of Beirut, and it's completely free as well, which is good. As you can see, it's super detailed. You can see everything here. What we're going to do is we're going to shoot an approach to one of the runways here. Now, Beirut Airport's quite interesting. It remained open through most of the civil war in Lebanon, and it has a bunch of different runways. The old runway, the main one, I think was this one, and the approaches were kind of here over the sea, and then the other approach was actually over land. And if you look behind me, you can just see we've got my A300 on the runway there. And you can see this has a huge displaced threshold. So you can see the touchdown point's not until all the way down here. And the reason for that is because you've got all these high buildings behind you. So if you make an approach here over the city, A lot of obstacles here, a lot of high buildings, and you come over some terrain as well, so they want to keep you really high. They very, very rarely land. I've never seen in my whole time of living in Lebanon, I never saw anything landing on this runway, but there is an RNAV approach to it. The normal landing runway, just out of interest for Lebanon, is either this one here, which is 03, I think it is. Again, it's got a big displaced threshold. It's normally this one, or the new runway, which is that one right there. So you approach over the sea, and if you sit on the left-hand side of the airplane, you get a great view of downtown Beirut as you come in. Now, let's have a look at what we're going to be doing today. I would like to show you is a non-precision approach. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, again, it's all a bit of a long and complicated and boring topic, but essentially a non-precision approach is something that doesn't have an ILS. There are some exceptions to that, and without kind of boring you senseless, really a precision approach is something that has an ILS because obviously it has two aspects to it. One, it has the localizer, which is this bit here, and then of course it has the glide slope, which we've been talking about over the last couple of videos, and that brings you all the way down to the runway. And using a combination of the two, the localizer, which lines you up with the runway, and then the glide slope that brings you all the way down, it's a bit wonky again, isn't it? Then you can bring yourself out at the touchdown point on the runway, and all is well. Now, what do you do in a situation where maybe you don't have all of these? And sometimes that happens. So let's say, for example, that we get to a point where we do not have a glide slope. Well, that becomes what they call a localizer only approach. And the only thing that we will use in this case is going to be the localizer to line us up. So we can steer ourselves onto the localizer, and the airplane will track that using the lock button. Because remember, of course, in the A300, it has two buttons. It has the land button, so that will give you the glide slope and the localizer if they're both working. Or if you're only doing a localizer approach, so in this situation, no glide slope, and we want to use just the localizer, then we would press the VL button, and it would just track the localizer. The glide slope bit we would have to do ourselves. Now, you can do that old school by doing it with vertical speed, and I'll probably do a video where I'll kind of show you how it was done old school. It's quite hard to do, actually. Quite high workloads, quite hard to do in the sim because it's quite fiddly, because you have to kind of dial the vertical speed, and there's quite a bit to do. Or you can basically cheat, which is what we're going to do today, and we're going to use the profile mode of the A300 to bring us down. Now, this works for every kind of approach, so let's have a look at a different one. Let's, for example, have a look at a VOR approach. Now, in this situation, there is no localizer. This is not an ILS. All this is using is this VOR, which is based at the airport, the Kaldi VOR, KAD. Basically, a line comes out from the VOR. Again, it's not very straight, is it? And this is kind of, if you like, a localizer. It's not called a localizer. It's just called a radial. But it basically does the same thing. So in this situation, what we would do is we would fly ourselves to this point here called Ramla, and then we'd make a left turn, and then rather in this situation pressing the lock button, we would press the V button. I mean, it's the same button, right? It's V and L, and then it's pretty much the same thing, to be honest with you. At 2,000 feet, what we would then do is manually manipulate the airplane down to the missed approach point, which is here, which is 2 miles away. And at that point, either we're going to be visual with the runway, or we're not. And if we're not, then we have to climb up and we have to go around. And that's essentially how a VOR approach works. Now, the thing is, because it's a VOR approach, because it's a lot less precise than an ILS, and that's why it's called a non-precision approach, because it's less precise, then the minima, in other words, how low you can go down to the runway before you have to make a decision to land is quite high. It's 1,100 feet. So if the weather was really lousy here and there was low cloud, or it was a bit foggy, we would be able to descend to 1,100 feet. And if at that point we couldn't see the runway, then we would have to go around. That's basically how it works. So what I'll do is I will make a couple of videos showing these kind of old school VOR and localizer approaches, and you can see that there's a pretty high workload. You know, you're kind of doing the vertical speed. You would have to have a look at your speed over the ground, so probably be about, what, 140 knots in the A300, something like that, and would need to come down at around 700 feet a minute. And then you basically just kind of just twiddle the little knobs. You basically would just tweak your descent rate as you come down, and you'd also check off the altitudes as well. So it's 6 miles from the VOR, So basically, just as you come past the top of descent, you would need to be 1,900 feet. At 5 miles, you would need to be at 1,590 feet. And then at 4 miles, 1,270 feet. So basically, it's your job as you come down the slope to make sure that you're hitting all these altitudes accurately. So maybe you're a little bit high, you're a little bit low. You would then have to tweak that vertical speed a little bit higher or a little bit lower. Quite hard to do in the sim, not gonna lie. I've done a few of these in our training programs before, and they're really, really quite difficult to do. Thankfully, the A300 has a little trick up its sleeve. So I will in a future video show you how this is done in the old school way, but now I'm going to show you the little party trick of the A300. It can do these kind of approaches in what's called profile mode, and it basically does it all for you. Now, what we're going to do, rather than do a VOR approach or a localizer approach or an NDB approach, what I'm actually going to do is this one. It's an RNAV approach to runway 21. And the reason I've chosen this is because it's a little bit unusual. This runway, runway 21, is the one that you just saw a moment ago in the video, and it's the one where basically you have all of those buildings and you kind of approach over the buildings, and then it has that really deep, long displaced threshold. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to be landing on that runway, and it's very unusual to use this. I've never seen in my time living in Beirut, I never saw anybody landing on this runway. But it does have a published approach to it. So it all starts at this point here, which is called BA417. And this is just a place in time and space, if you like. The aeroplane knows where it is from the GPS and its inertial reference system, the IRS's. It knows where this is, and as long as it knows where that is, then it knows how to get to the next point, which is BA418. So we just come from 417, then we go to 418, and then we come along here to 419, and that is the missed approach point. All right, so we come in at 417, 4,000 feet or above. We would then descend down to 418 at 2,100 feet, and then we would make that what I guess it would be a right turn to 419, and that is the missed approach point, which is 1,200 feet. So that's how low we can go before we have to make the decision to land or not. Won't be a problem today. Because Lebanon in the summer is very nice and warm. So that is obviously looking at it from a kind of top-down view. And then if you look at it from the side view, we come in here 2,100 feet, and then we descend down to 419, and then we've got to decide whether we're going to land or whether we're going to go around. So that basically is what the approach looks like. Now, there are no approach aids here, remember. This isn't based on any VORs or an ILS or a localizer, an NDB or anything. This is basically just an approach that's been drawn in the sky, and the aeroplane knows how to interpret all these little points. The one thing that we do have is there is a VOR on the airfield. That's the KAD VOR. That was the one that the approach to the other runway is based on. What we can do is just keep an eye on these little altitudes. You see at 5 miles, 1270, 6 miles, 1590, and 7 miles, 1910. And actually, having flown this, and I did practice this once or twice to completely not screw it up, and I noticed that the altitudes were a little bit off, sometimes a little bit higher than it should be, or sometimes a little bit lower. Again, don't sweat that too much. You do see this often in the sim, where sometimes these distances and altitudes and stuff don't quite match up. You've probably seen it a lot as well with runways where the PAPIs don't quite match, where it shows you really high when in fact you're low. So sometimes you just have to take a bit of a judgment call and just kind of eyeball it. And if it kind of looks right, then run with it. So that's basically what we're going to do. We're going to do this RNAV approach. We're going to plug this into the FMS, and the aeroplane is just going to fly this whole thing on its own. And what it does is it actually creates itself a little virtual glide slope. So here at the 4.3 point where it needs to come down, the aeroplane will descend on this 3-degree angle. All right, so 3.0. And you can actually see this in the aeroplane. It actually shows you the steepness, if you like, of the path, and it will just come down this 3-degree glide slope, and it draws itself, and it kind of works out its own little virtual glide slope all the way down, and we can just sit there and watch it. And the other thing is as well is that it will control the speed, so we don't need to worry about that. A little bit like in the A320, we just take our hands off and we let it control the speed. And the one final thing you've got to remember with this is that it will disconnect the autopilot when it reaches the MDA. So when it reaches the decision point, when we descend below that, it will disconnect the autopilot automatically, and I will have to take control. And if you kind of forget about that, sometimes it can catch you a little bit by surprise. It's going to be at around 1,100, 1,200 feet. The autopilot will disconnect itself, and then I'm going to have to fly. So don't let that surprise you. It's not going to fly the airplane all the way down to the ground. It is not that accurate. It's a non-precision approach. It's designed just to get us in the vicinity of the runway so we're visual and we can land ourselves. That's how it works. All right, let's get in the airplane and let's go and fly this RNAV approach to runway 21, and hopefully the airplane is going to fly this itself. Okay, so welcome then to the flight deck. We are here and we're lined up ready to go and shoot this RNAV 21 approach into Beirut. Now, let me show you what we've done so far. All I've done is using the arrival prompt that I've selected, the RNAV 21. And that's all I've done. There's no star for this approach because that's all behind us now. We've kind of done all that. So the RNAV 21 approach is in here, and it didn't have, for some reason, I don't quite know why, the BA417 did not appear in the nav display. It didn't have that as part of the approach. That sometimes happens with X-Plane, perhaps if it wasn't coded into the approach or something like that. So always worth double checking that you're going to see this. So I manually entered a BA417, and I also put in that crossing restriction, because if you remember, look on the chart, it's 4,000 or above. So I entered that one as well, just so that we didn't get bent out of shape. And the aircraft at the moment is in nav mode, and we are heading direct to BA417, and that is the beginning of the RNAV approach. Also, I've got manual control of the speed here. I've wound it right back to the green dot speed, so we're flying as slow as we can without the flaps right now. We're level at 4,000 feet in altitude hold, and we're in nav right now. And just let me sync up the heading bug. Remember, just push the middle of the heading bug, and that will sync it up with where you want to be. So be a good boy and make sure that you do that as well. Now, what I want you to do is take a quick look at my takeoff and approach page. You can see that we've got the approach here, the V approach. That's how fast we need to fly the approach, or in fact how slow we can fly the approach, if you prefer to look at it that way. I've also entered the MDA for the approach as well, which is 1,200 feet. And you will notice at the bottom here, we have this little prompt which says final 3.0. That, of course, is the angle of the glide slope. If you remember, having a look at the chart, you can see that this is a 3-degree glide slope, and that's what this final 3.0 is showing us here. Now, if you don't see final 3. Well, I say 0 because I'm English, but 0 probably makes more sense if you're not English. If you don't see final 3.0, don't panic. That probably means that you're in heading select. So let me put us back in a heading select for a second, and you can see that it disappears. If you don't see it, don't panic. It just means that you're not in nav mode. Now, remember, of course, for the profile to work, for the aircraft to know where to steer us and also when to bring us down, it needs to be in nav mode. If it's not in nav mode, this is not going to work. You will not be able to shoot a VNAV approach effectively, or a managed nav approach, unless you're in nav. You can't do it in heading select. You can only do it when it's in nav, and that's what you're seeing there, which is that final 3.0. If you don't see it, probably means you're in heading select. Another little gotcha as well is that we've got to re-engage the profile mode to get the aircraft down. So if you're flying level as we are now in altitude hold, remember the aircraft's got to be in profile mode when we're ready to come down. So it doesn't really matter how you arrive at this point. You can fly the aircraft pretty much any way you like, to be honest with you. You can fly at level change, vertical speed, whatever. All you've got to remember, the golden rule for flying a non-precision approach in this aircraft, is that you've got to be level at the platform altitude, which in this case is at BA418, and we've got to be level at 2,100 feet. We have to be in nav mode, and we also need to be in a non-profile vertical mode. So in other words, altitude hold, not in profile. Does that make sense? This is something that they changed later on for the A320, which is basically where you can arm a managed approach even while the aircraft's still in profile. In the A300, you cannot engage this while it's still in profile. I know it sounds a bit weird and a bit stupid, but the best way to remember it, the golden rule, is that get yourself to the final approach altitude, which is going to be 2,100 feet on this approach. Get yourself there. Doesn't matter how you get there, but as long as you arrive at that point in the nav mode and also in altitude hold is probably the best mode to be thinking about at that point. and get yourself level. Right, we just crossed over BA 417. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to descend us now down in level change down to 2,100 feet. And this is the beginning of that RNAV approach. The bit where the aircraft is going to want to descend in its profile mode is going to be at BA 418. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is you can see it's got the little blue arrow. This is where the aircraft wants to start descending down. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use level change. That's going to get us down to 2,100 feet. Then we'll put the aircraft into profile. So basically you can fly this first bit of the approach yourself. Let's start getting some flaps out. I'm going to bring us back to S speed. And what I'll do is in a second, once we get below the flap 2 speed, which is 205 knots, I'm going to go to flap 2. So let's go to flap 2. Let's take the gear. And I'm going to bring the speed back now to VAP, which is 138. I'm going to give it a few knots above, if you remember. The airplane gets a bit bent out of shape if you fly it too slow. Alright, so the gear's down. We're below the flap 3 speed. And in a second, we'll be below the flap 4 speed, so we can do that as well. So, pulling up the chart, let's just have a quick update. We've flown already past BA 417 and descended from 4,000 feet down to the platform altitude, which is where we then need to make our final descent, which is BA 418. So at the moment, we're just coming up to BA 418. The aircraft's in level change and descending down to 2,100 feet. And remember, the aim of the game is to be level at 2,100 feet, ready to make the final approach. And don't forget, of course, as the aircraft makes each turn itself, because it's in nav mode right now, make sure you keep the heading bugs synced up with where we're going with a push on the heading selector. We're leveling out 2,100 feet. Just keep the speed up. The aircraft's struggling a little bit because, as you imagine, we've got a lot of drag here. We've got the gear down. We've got full flap. Just getting a little bit on the back of the drag curve there, but it's not a problem. It's speeding up now, sorting itself out. There you go. Right, so now we need to get the aircraft back in profile mode so it descends. But you'll notice if you push it now, nothing will happen. So we have to go down and push the final 3.0 button and then press the profile button. And now the approach is armed. The aircraft has taken control of the speed. Look, the speed window is blanked. And now it's turning itself onto the final approach course. There's the runway, dead ahead. And let's sit and watch the magic happen. We've got a VDEV of 10, so we're pretty much on the path. And if you remember, at 7 miles, we needed to be at 1,910 feet. We were pretty much there. We were probably about 10 feet off. The next altitude check is going to be at 6 miles, and that's 1,590. So keep an eye on here. 6.4, 6.3. Remember, 1,590 is the altitude we're looking for. 6.1, 1,580. All right, there you go. It's within 10 feet. I can live with that. I need to set the go-around altitude and make sure that the heading is on the runway heading. The final approach heading, I believe, is 200. That's correct. Right, next thing that's going to happen is any second now, the autopilot is going to disconnect and I am going to have to fly the aeroplane. So let me get the thrust where we want it to be. That's about there. There's the autopilot coming out. I've got manual thrust, manual control. I'm going to turn the flight directors off and now it's my aeroplane. So at this point, we're not going to bother looking at the VDEV because that's not going to help us. It's a purely from this point visual maneuver, and you can see I've just picked up the pappies and we've got 1 white and we've got 3 reds. They're a little bit low. Let me throw on a little bit of power and I want to regain the pappies. A little bit hard to see from this altitude. There we go. That looks all right. And now all we're going to do is just manually line ourselves up with a runway and we're good to go. A little bit more speed. That'll do. Okay. Now, very weird picture here because what you're seeing looks like an incredibly long runway, but it isn't really because it's got that big displaced threshold. So getting ourselves now just a little bit high, but you know what? With all these buildings here, I can probably live with being maybe one white high on the Pappy. That looks all right. There we go. Right, 2 whites, 2 reds. We're in good shape. Let's just keep it coming down. Speed a little bit fast. Okay, path is good. Speed's a little bit fast, but we're okay. I'm just got to keep it coming down now. And it looks like a really long runway, but it's not. Actually, by the time we touch down, there isn't going to be a lot left. Okay, that looks good. And about 40 feet will transition into the flare. That'll do. Hold it off, hold it off, hold it off. There we are. Right. Hit the reverse. Remember that it's very slow to come in this aeroplane. We've got a nice decel there. There's 80 knots, take him out. I was going to try and go for that one on the right there, that turn off, but I think that might be a little bit ambitious. So let's not bother with that. And what we're going to do is I'll tap the brakes and then we're going to turn ourselves right and exit from this exit here on the right. So as you saw, it all happened very, very fast. And because that had quite a high MDA, that approach, it disconnected the autopilot. And after that, it became a purely visual maneuver. But you did see that within about 10 feet or so, the aircraft did pretty much fly itself down the path. And really, the whole point of that non-precision approach was just to get us in a position where we could manually find the runway. And that's exactly what we did. So that actually all went pretty well. So I hope that makes sense. Basically, the golden rules of flying the non-precision approach in this aircraft: load up the non-precision approach into the FMGC, put the MDA in, and then when you're ready to descend down, so you want to be level at the platform altitude with all the flaps and all the gear, when you're ready to descend, press that final 3.0 button and then press profile on the FCU, and then the aircraft will descend. It will create its own little path and you can sit back and watch the magic happen. That's basically how it works. Right, I need to go and do some cleanup actions and all that, and I will see you in Cyprus, where we're going to go and shoot a VOR approach, and I'll show you the old school way of doing a VOR, and also I'll show you using the magic of the profile mode in the A300. My brakes are hot, and after that, I'm really not surprised. I will see you in Cyprus, my friends.